Hey everyone, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the podcast where I just invite other writers to pop on to a Zoom call, and we have a lovely conversation about writing, the craft, inspiration, the writer's journey, and sometimes we talk about specific books as well. Before I get started, just a reminder that my company, Unbound Writer, is offering an October 2024 2.5-day immersive writing and coaching retreat in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. So you'll want to check that out. Also offering one-on-one coaching, and we are just now launching our first series of online classes. So you can look at those and check out all of our offerings at unboundwriter.com. On the show today, I had a repeat. So and I think this is going to be show 150. So that's exciting. And out of 150 episodes, I've had a couple repeats, 2 or 3, maybe 4. I don't remember. I typically don't have a lot of repeats on. PR agencies tend to pitch the same guests to me when they have their next book coming out. But because this podcast largely focuses on the writer's journey, their upbringing, their inspirations for becoming a writer, I don't usually talk to them a second time. But sometimes I get pitched somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember talking to this person. I really enjoyed that conversation. I want to talk to them again. I have them on. Such was the case with today's episode where I had the writer Lauren Thoman on. So Lauren was previously on episode 87 back in May of 2023. She just released her debut novel, and she is back. And we talked a little bit about her follow-up novel, You Shouldn't Be Here. And I'm not saying that to you. That's the name of her book. She referenced it a couple times on our conversation, and at first I'm like, why are you telling me I shouldn't be here? It sounded incredibly rude, but it is the name of her book. It was just out actually yesterday, August 1st, published by Thomas and Mercer, which is an Amazon imprint. But we didn't really talk too much about the book. We just kind of talked about how her life has been since her last release, what her debut release was like, what that experience was like, her inspiration for writing You Shouldn't Be Here. And we talked a lot about genre, about what makes something YA versus adult fiction, because she went through that with her first book. And I'm having those questions right now as I just co-wrote a book with a friend that we're trying to decide, is this adult fiction or is it YA? And I think the answer is it's not going to be up to us. It's going to be up to any publisher who decides that they want to buy it. But interesting conversation nonetheless. And of course, we made up a weird story at the end. We made up a weird story the first time she was on, and I would venture to say it got even weirder this time. So you're going to like this one, folks. This is my second conversation with Lauren Thoman. Remind me where you are again?
Outside Nashville.
That's right. I'll be there next week, actually.
Yeah. Well, currently it's just like Satan's armpit here, so hopefully it will be better next weekend.
Yeah. So next week in Nashville, and then I'll be back for BoucherCon.
Oh yeah, me too.
Lots of Nashville in my near future. Yeah. So it's easy for you. That's great. That's awesome.
Yes. I have Killer Nashville and then BoucherCon back to back.
I've never been to Killer Nashville. I get all their emails. I'm not sure why. But how is that conference?
I've never been as an attendee. It's like less than 10 minutes from my house. And so last year I just got a room at the hotel and treated it as an informal writing retreat for the weekend. Cause I was like, look, I've been to a lot of conferences. I don't necessarily need to see the panels or anything. I just kind of want to hang out with people. So I was like, I'm just going to plant myself in the lobby near the bar and I will get to meet all the people that are here. And that worked quite well.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I mean, and that's really it, right? I mean, I feel like it's funny you mentioned about panels. I'm the same way. There are very few panels that I'm like, oh, I really want to see this, because when you start talking about like craft, I mean, everyone's different. For me, I feel like, I'm on book 10. I'm like, whether I do it well or not, I do it the way that I like. And
I do it the way that I do it. Yeah, I'm like, most of the times I'm going to go to a panel, it's because of someone I already know that I want to support, or like an author I really love. But I'm like, I'm very rarely going based on the topic of the panel. It's always just who's on it.
Sometimes like there's some, I like the business ones, the publishing panels, because I still feel like there's a ton, obviously, I don't know. And so
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
I'll hear like when you have like editors up there talking about the
Hmm.
industry, that's pretty interesting to me because you hear about things about how they make decisions about certain things. But
Oh, yeah. And so much of it changes so much that it's like, what is it this year? It was
right,
different last year. Like,
right,
what things are people
totally.
doing? But when it's like, here's how you write a book, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm kind of set in how I write a book. So,
Yeah, and right. And I know like you can be better and I like to think
yeah.
I organically get better because I'm
Yes.
constantly writing and I'm constantly reading. But on the other hand, like if I start thinking about like, well, wouldn't it be better if I really thought about the three act structure, if I really paid attention to the hero's journey? And then all of a sudden I'm like, it's now it's homework.
That's why I can't use beat sheets, is because I wind up,
Use what?
I figured this out. I can't use beat sheets, like Save the Cat,
What?
like the beats.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I don't even know what beat
like,
sheets are.
oh, yeah. Well, it's like there's a bunch of different ones. Like there's the Save the Cat beat sheet, or like the John Truby or the Pixar or the any of them, but they like have, like you're supposed to spend this many pages on this, and then this many pages on this, and then like you kind of each
Oh,
beat of the story. And I have some friends that swear by them, and that's how they make their stories. And every time I've tried to do one, I treated it like I was doing a worksheet in school where I'm trying to impress some sort of imaginary teacher with the
right.
best possible answer. And I'm like, this is not right. I can't use them.
Yeah, and it feels a little bit formulaic in a way. Like if you've read enough and if you've watched enough TV, your subconscious has absorbed what makes something interesting to you. And you'll have a sense of like, there's not enough happening right now in my story. I need something needs to happen. But that's not because
Yeah.
a beat sheet is telling you that. It's because you just have a sense because you've absorbed and have
Yeah.
created for so many years. It kind of comes to you.
Mm-hmm. And I'll sometimes go back and look at it after I've written a draft. And I'm like, what did I miss? And I'm like, oh, this is why this section isn't working because I skipped over this whole thing, or I've stayed way too long in this section that's supposed to not take that long, or something like that. But I can
Right.
never do it first. I've tried too many times.
Right.
It's
And
useless.
if you spend way too long on it, while you're writing that way too long section, you're enjoying yourself. It's not like you're miserable doing it. It's way too long,
Yeah.
probably because you particularly love that section. And then in your editing phase, you can objectively recognize that all right, got a lot of this shit has to go. But you wouldn't have had as much fun writing the book had you not gone way too long. I had a
Yeah.
scene I wrote actually two of my last two books are each set in the 80s, and I had an arcade scene that probably went for like 4,000 words. It was just obnoxious just because it excited me to like relive being 15 years old in a 1980s arcade in the mall, and I trimmed it down to maybe like a couple pages at most. But I had so much fun writing it.
If you have time when you're in Nashville, which you probably don't if you're here for like work things, but there is I forget what it's called. I can email you what it's called if you want me to. But it's an arcade bar where it has just like every retro arcade game, and most of them are free. Like you just go and it's a bar, and then you just play like old school Pac-Man and Street
Yeah, that's
Fighter and
awesome.
like Metroid and all the
Right,
old school games. It's really neat. And they also have like, I'm like, this is very much a Gen X millennial
right,
haven.
right.
Like
No, sounds
everyone
awesome.
there is of an age. And I was like,
Right,
yeah, this is nostalgia of the bar,
right. You can play for free if you as long as you keep drinking.
basically.
Um, so congratulations on your recent
Thank
release.
you.
That's
Thank
exciting.
you.
That's book number two,
Yeah.
correct?
Book number two.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And and also your guest, you're my 150th episode. Um, so that's kind of
Yay!
cool. So
That's exciting.
um
Milestones all over.
and I was just looking up. I'm like, what did we talk about last time? When was
I don't
this?
know.
And it was episode 87 in May of last year. So it was either right before or right as book number one was
Yeah, right
getting
after.
out to the
Hmm.
wild. Um, and normally on these shows, I spend a lot of time as we did before, kind of just going through, your journey as a writer, but we've kind of covered that. So
Hmm.
for listeners wanting to hear all about Lauren's struggles and ultimate success as a writer, go to episode 87. You can hear all about it. But I thought we would just kind of talk shop a little bit and just hear what you've been up to,
Sure.
hear a little bit about the new book. One thing so you were originally, your first book was with Mindy's
Mindy
book something. Um,
Studio. Mindy's Book
Mindy's book
Studio.
studio. So Mindy Kaling,
Hmm.
which was it's an Amazon imprint. Um,
Yes.
and then your new book is with Thomas and Mercer, which is
Hmm.
also Amazon, but maybe more. Thomas and Mercer probably skews more mystery, thriller, suspense.
Mystery, thriller, crime. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was that the reason for the move.
Uh, yes and no. Mindy's Book Studio is it's kind of its own weird thing, like weird in a good way.
And I think she only has
Where
like
it's
4 titles right now.
no, she has more now.
Oh, does
I
she?
think
Because I
there's
was.
like
Oh,
I think there's
okay.
like 6 or 7 out now.
Okay.
Um,
On the
but
website with Amazon, it just shows 4.
yeah,
Maybe those are
they are a
spotlighted.
little slow in updating the website. But
Okay.
um, they're Mindy is treating her imprint like it is its own imprint that is actually the publisher, but she's also treating it kind of like a celebrity book club in that it's like most imprints at most publishers, they will stick with the same author for numerous books, but she's like, no, everything's a one-off over there. So it was just because Mindy picks up one title from you, she's probably not picking up another because she doesn't want to be doing multiple titles by the same author, since she's also kind of treating it like a Reese or an Oprah or something like their book clubs.
Right. So Reese wouldn't necessarily just keep picking titles from the same author. She would
Yeah,
pick
and I mean,
titles.
I think
Yeah.
some of them they go on long enough. Like I think Reese has done a couple double dips with certain
Yeah.
authors that over the years, but since Mindy's this is fairly new, it was like, no, let's try to like each book that we put out is going to be by a different author, even if it is someone that's writing more things that still fit with the brand. And so I actually kept my same editor. But and the other thing is that Mindy's Book Studio doesn't have, at least as far as when I was published there, doesn't have its own dedicated staff. They kind of like pull from all the other imprints. And so like my editor is primarily a Thomas and Mercer editor that also has a couple books with Mindy. And they're also like Montlake editors that do, or, so that's kind of, it's sort of its own weird, almost blend between a traditional publishing imprint and a celebrity book club thing. So now I am still with my same editor, but at the Thomas and Mercer imprint, which is, crime, mystery, thriller imprint. And that's what she does most of the time anyway. And that's basically true for any of the authors that are with Mindy. Their follow-up books will probably be with another Amazon imprint, but with the same editor.
So your experience was like largely the same. It's the same publishing company, same editor, same editorial notes. Like,
same basic.
You have a different
process.
editor. That's when it gets a little bit weird because then you're not used to that relationship and those notes.
Yeah, it was the same basic process, just with a little bit less of the glitz and glamour of being with the Mindy imprint, and which I knew going up front. They were like, some of this was because it was Mindy. Like, we don't do that for every book. And it's like, well, no. And also it was a debut. And so, but I still feel like I've been treated very nicely.
Well, that's good. That's good. And have you been, in terms of the mystery thriller suspense, do you feel like you've gotten kind of, I don't know if the word darker is correct, or do you feel like your second release was markedly different in tone than your first?
I think it was some, and a lot of that was intentional, because when I was writing I'll Stop the World, I knew I had this kind of multi-generational cast, but in my brain, because my main character was a teenager, I was like, this is probably going to be marketed YA. And then marketing made the decision, actually, we're going to shelve it as adult. And the reason, it made sense. They were like, you've got adult characters, you've got teenage characters, but it's not really a typical YA conflict. And teens are a lot more likely to pick up a book marketed to adults than adults are to pick up a book marketed to teens. So let's
100%.
put it in this lane. And if teens want to pick it up, they can. And I was like, that makes sense to me because everything I was a teen was marketed to adults. This one, though, a lot of the like negative pushback for the first book was that people were like, "Why isn't this YA?" And I was like, "Because they told me it wasn't. I don't market my own things."
Right.
So this time, knowing I was following that up, I was like, "All right, let's skew it a little more adult." And with that, lean a little heavier into more adult themes, a little bit darker. But I still have that cross generational, just because I find that interesting.
Yeah. Well,
So,
let's talk about that for a moment because selfishly, I'm curious as well. I just co-wrote for the first time, and
oh,
and I gave it to my agent, and she loves it. Thank God. But it is different. It's set in the '80s, and we're trying to decide if it's YA or not. But single point of view, present tense. From a 16-year-old boy. But it's a very dark book, and it doesn't really deal with things kids normally deal with. It deals with murder, basically.
yeah.
And so we had actually, it was funny. It's just like 3 hours ago, we had a whole hour-long conversation about what is this, and because she doesn't really rep YA, so that's kind of an issue too. But so the question is, what is YA? So how old was your protagonist in your first book?
18.
18.
18.
And I feel
Newly
like there's a
18.
cusp because I've written books from 18 and 19 and 21-year-olds that were all adult fiction. But then when you skew, and she actually had made a really interesting comment, my agent, because she said in the book, it's like basically a group of teenagers trying to essentially solve a crime. And she's like, if it's the kids that are doing the solving, it feels more YA, even though it's very dark. There's language. There's no sex, but there's some fairly adult themes. But I mean, ask any 12-year-old, and they could probably name you any adult theme that you could. So, what do you think in that first book of yours? Like, why did you think it was YA, and do you think that the decision to market it as adult fiction was purely, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but opportunistic? Like, I think it'll sell better if we market it as adult fiction.
I mean, I think it was both. I've had a lot of I put a lot of thought into it after I found out it was actually not even from my publisher that I found out that it was being marketed adult. It was from the YA, the children's rep at my local indie, because I was trying to arrange an event, and she looked at it. She's like, "Oh, did you know that your book is actually being marketed as adult? You don't go through me. You have to go through our adult rep." And I was like, "I'm sorry, what?" So that was like the first
Right, because she
time
just
I
looked at
heard,
the
was I
back of
heard
the
it.
book probably
Yeah,
and
she just
saw that
looked
it
at the
was adult
looked up the
fiction.
ISBN in their system and was like, "Yeah, this isn't my lane." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I like checked with my editor. I was like, "Was this a mistake?" She was like, "No, that was on purpose." But so since then, I've thought a lot about it, and I think, and like what the differentiation is, because like it's definitely not just the age of the character. Because if you think about some of the
No.
books that you know, that I know I was reading, and like Stephen King's It is largely about middle schoolers.
Yep,
It is not a middle
100%.
grade book. That is an
No.
adult book. And even if you took out the entire adult storyline, it would still be an adult book.
Right.
Like,
Right.
because the
And that's
things
how
that
I
those,
see kind of the book that I just wrote is more like
Mhm.
that. Almost
Yeah, because I'm like, the
horror.
things that these kids are dealing with is like, there is that degree of coming of age, wrestling with identity and adolescence piece of it. But the conflict and the stakes are much more in the adult realm than in the YA
Right.
realm or the middle grade. And like, and that used to be true of like a lot of genre fiction, like not just, I can think of like, there's several Stephen King books that have teenage protagonists, but also like a
Right.
lot of sci-fi, a lot of fantasy is about teenagers. Like, I mean, even like Game
Right.
of Thrones, like half those characters in the books are teenagers. It's not
Right.
YA. Um,
Right.
so part of it is about just the overall tone and voice of like, does it sound younger? Does it sound older? Which is very subjective. And it's also funny because, as you said, like younger, like teenagers now are, they understand a lot more than we tend to give them credit for. And I did have some editorial questions in I'll Stop the World, because I had this 12-year-old character and these 12-year-old bullies. And sometimes she'd be like, "This seems very mature for 12." And I was like, "No, that's what 12 is
Yeah.
there. She was like, would they really sound like this? And I was like, yeah, because that's 12 is trying to like straddle this cusp of childhood and adulthood. Um, but so I think in YA, a lot of times the conflicts are um, more are kind of they tend to be personal about personal growth and learning and figuring out your place in the world, figuring out what type of person you want to be when you grow up. Um, whereas I think adult, a lot of it tends to focus more on like the world as it is and
Right.
trying to figure out how um, you or how your characters navigate that and like find their place and figure out how to maybe make their whatever conflict they're up against in the world as it is resolve it in a way that is the best for all involved. But I think it just tends to be um a little more outward facing,
Right.
a little more it's hard to even put into words, like maybe a little more like
Right.
global in scope.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
as far as like what types of conflicts is the world in, where are we in whereas I think with YA and middle grade it tends to be very like self-focused,
Yeah. And
because
there's a fine line between all of that, right? Because most of
Mhm.
my thrillers deal with this is this one person and this is this one person's major struggle that really doesn't affect anyone else or very few
Yeah,
people except for but yeah, and it's the same with all genre. Like what's the difference between thriller and suspense, for example?
I've
Um,
still never figured that one out,
I know,
like
I know. I've seen different definitions, and ultimately, I write what appeals to me, and then hope something good happens with it.
yeah.
Um, but my agent made a really good point too, and she said, once it's YA, if it's deemed to be YA by the editors, then it's probably subject to more scrutiny, more like sensitivity readers are probably going to be much more uh, attuned to a younger readership as they go through your manuscript,
Hmm.
and that's kind of interesting too, because it's like what can you get away with maybe, or what could you do in an adult fiction that you couldn't do in YA. I mean, I think there are some pretty obvious answers to that. I think sex is a big one.
Hmm.
That, that
But
which
there are YA books with sex in them. Like
totally,
it's not
totally.
explicit, like you're not getting
No,
YA erotica or anything, but
no.
I mean like characters are, it's not like characters are going to cuss, they're going to have sex, like they're going to, occasionally kill someone. Like it's not
Right. Maybe at
it's
a greater frequency than the adult characters.
yeah, I think YA does have like there's a more of an impulsivity to it, more of
Right.
a like focus on the immediate rather than the long term. But
Right.
yeah, I
Right.
think there's the lines are very blurry. And I don't think that I don't think it's easy to differentiate between them. And I feel like anyone that thinks they can do it really easily probably just hasn't read a lot of one or the other, because I'm like,
Right.
I'm not going to say it's less complex because it's just as complex but in different ways, or that it's simpler, it's not simpler, it's just different.
No, because
Uh
you're trying to capture a voice that you might not be as familiar with anymore. I mean, obviously, we all were that age at some point in a different time
mhm,
period. People have kids, and I remember like when my kids were coming of age, like I knew
mhm,
I could capture their voice if I needed to. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges with it for sure. The
mhm,
other challenge, especially if you're dating yourself, going back and writing in the 80s, for example, this was part of our conversation today. Like you could write something that would be totally believable in terms of what somebody would maybe say in the 80s. And when I say, I mean like say something derogatory,
yeah,
words that were totally accepted, but you wouldn't do that now because you still have to be
mhm,
sensitive to current readership. And so it's about how do you find that balance between because you don't want it to be unbelievable either. Like, oh,
Yeah.
nobody would have like, they would have totally said this in the 80s. Why are they couching it? And it's like, well, then you say it and they're like, I can't believe this word is in that book.
Yeah. And like because All Stop the World is largely set in the 80s. And my approach, honestly, with both modern and 80s, was my kids told me don't use any Gen Z slang because by the time you publish it, it's going to be out of date. And that they were right. So I didn't. But I also then didn't like lean heavily on 80s slang or that sort of, because I was like, it's going to feel weird. It's going to
No,
feel
you can pepper
like
it in.
it won't. Yeah. I'm like, because book exists in a vacuum and the readership is coming to it today with today's sensibilities, and like you put some stuff in and it's like, well, that might have been true for the time period, but it's going to feel weird reading it today. It's going to actually take a reader out of the story. It actually makes a little easier to read, to make it a little more familiar in some ways, and then use other elements like setting and technology and
Right.
um to really like similar, if any sort of historical fiction, the
Right.
dialogue does not actually sound like they would have actually talked back in
Right.
like Regency times, because it was just a
Right.
totally different vernacular. And if you're true to the time period, it's nowadays it's like, this sounds so strange, I have a hard time parsing this. And I feel like it's kind of would be the same if you're constantly throwing in like these slurs and assumptions that were so prevalent, but now people read it and they're like, and I feel like it tells almost the wrong thing about the characters, that because
Right.
you're like, I want you to feel this way, and it's like, but they're doing all these things that nowadays would be considered horrible, and it's like, no, it's
Right.
fine back then. It's like,
Right.
no. So I think you've kind of got to go for it to feel more emotionally true rather than
Right.
historic
And getting
true.
your feet, like I think of like, Huckleberry Finn's a great example, right? Like, Jim's dialogue was very
Oh,
phonetic. And can you imagine trying to write like that and having it not sound insulting? But it was like, this is how I am hearing this, and this is how
mhm.
I am. So you have a great image of the character, but that would be totally not cool to do today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes you can like, kind of allude to it. Like they said like some horribly
Right.
derogatory
How am I
things. And
here?
it's
How is this
like,
other character hearing and
and it's like,
processing it?
yeah. And you don't have to say exactly what they're saying for someone that lived through that time to be like, I have an idea of
Right.
it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
Whereas, some readers would probably be like, yep, that's how it was. But you don't want to necessarily alienate anyone that for which that's going to be like very off-putting and very triggering and harmful, and be
Right.
like, nope, don't need to engage with this.
Right.
So it's like,
I mean, that's
it's
a
almost
really
like a
interesting
fill in the
point,
blank.
because if you have somebody, so say you have a character with a severe speech impediment, say,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason that's critical to the story, or say a stutter. If you were to write their stutter out every time they spoke, it would be maddening. And so you
Mhm.
just kind of have to allude to it a couple times, and then that plants the seed. So the reader is going to start putting that in for themselves. And so you get that same richness of character
Mhm.
without the task of repeatedly kind of hitting them over the head with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the same with like with anything. Like if you have a character that's from another country and speaks with an accent, you're not going to drop every single time they have dialogue. They said in their Scottish accent. Like that's,
Right.
you don't need to say it every
Right.
single time to
Right.
keep reminding you they sound different than you do.
Right.
Assuming
Yeah.
you are American. Um, you just got to allude to it every now and then, and you can feel it until you listen to the audiobook and it's like, oh right, that's what that character sounds like.
Oh yeah. I never listen to I don't ever read my books. I don't ever listen to the audiobooks. I'll listen to like the little sample on Amazon,
Yeah.
and then they always send me. I get to choose. I help choose the voice actor, so I'll hear the
Yeah.
samples that they read. But that's the extent of it.
Yeah, I've spot listened to mine. Like I'll listen to
Yeah,
certain sections. I'm like, I wonder what they did with this section, and I'll listen. Like,
right.
that was fun.
Yeah,
No
that's a
more.
good point. I think my third book, The Comfort of Black, the narrator, who I think she did a great job, and I listened to the first chapter, but in my mind, she sounded like a school teacher. She sounded like a 1950s version of a school teacher,
Hmm.
just very proper sounding. And we're talking about the character was maybe a 33-year-old woman, And so there was just this dissonance to me, and I had written some really coarse things, and I'm like, all right, I want to hear this part. I want to hear this woman say these words.
Well, it's funny. So, and You Shouldn't Be Here, my villain, I had a voice for him in my brain, and I gave my audiobook narrator a few adjectives to describe the voice I was hearing in my brain. But since she couldn't hear what I was hearing, she used the descriptors I gave her and came up with a totally different voice where I was like, oh, she's actually taking all the notes I gave her, but the voice she went with is not at all what I was picturing for him. And honestly, I find it hilarious every time I hear because gave him like this high pitched, whiny, sniveling
Oh,
sort of, and I was like, this is kind of hilarious. Like, I love it, but it took me a minute to get used to it. When I
yeah,
was like hearing, I was like, oh, is that what he sounds like?
right.
Wow, that was not what I was imagining, but I can totally see how she got here based on the notes I gave her. And the more I listened to it, the more I was like, it fits. It works with the character. It's just really funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it fits for the readers, and it's funny because like I have different levels of even my protagonist. I have different levels of how much I know what they look like or what they sound like.
Mm-hmm.
Some books I see everything. Other books, I just have this vague, watery notion, but I very rarely ever describe them because I want the reader to have that
Mm-hmm.
experience for themselves. But the book that's coming out in January, the female lead is, I wanted to have video scenes in the book with her.
Oh.
Because there's moments in the book where she's recording herself on her iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I want to see what that looks like. So I hired an actress
Mm.
to do that for me. So I have like QR codes peppered throughout the book where you can scan it and you can watch that scene that you just read, watch her in that scene.
That's so cool.
And it's all presented as like recovered evidence,
Yeah.
basically, like it's an information request from the government. But now I'm
Bingo.
like,
Now it's
this
like a
is
multimedia
it
experience.
is, but now we know what she looks like. It's like this is her. This is my character Poe because I didn't describe her anywhere, but now you see her as you act.
Yeah.
So I actually did my acknowledgments as a video as well. So you just scan that code, and I talk about who I wanted to thank and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's so fun. Welcome to the future. Wow,
I
books. Books are now also videos.
But I love that. I mean, I've had websites that I've created that
Yeah.
are hidden in my books and artwork that I've had created that they've put in, and I love all that stuff. It's all like little Easter eggs. That's like it's
Hmm.
fun for because I want to usually it's like I want to see what this looks like. So that's how it starts, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I could put. I've had comics drawn for my books, so yeah, it's pretty wild like that.
Yeah.
What are you working on now? Did you have a
Uh,
multi-book deal with Thomas and Mercer? Or you,
no, no,
yeah,
it was a one book deal. And so right now I'm a free agent. I
yeah.
am
And that's always
um
how I've been for the most part. So I love it.
yeah, I mean I like the freedom of being able to work on whatever I want. It's a good thing I haven't been on deadline this summer because when you're asking what are you working on right now, I'm like getting kids ready for school. That's what I'm working on.
How old are your
Um,
kids?
16 and 18. So I have my oldest is starting college in 2 weeks. And so that's kind of like been absorbing
Yeah,
my consciousness
mine are
for,
3 years ahead of yours. So I've
yeah.
yes, I know exactly that exactly. The going off to college for the first time is a big deal.
Yeah. And last summer, so I sold You Shouldn't Be Here last spring and I had to write it over last summer. And writing a book to deadline over the summer was hellish. And I was like, what made me think that this was a good time of year for me to write a book as fast as I can? Like,
Right.
it's just so hard for me when I'm like, the kids are home, there's no set schedule, every day is different. Like, I can't settle into a routine. Um, and also, it's just hard for me to focus when the kids are home and it's nice outside because I'm just like, I want to be doing summer things. I don't want to
Right.
be. So, summer, I have been kind of just trying to get this book launched and do all the prep for that. But in between, I have a couple projects I'm working on. One, I am working on a post apocalyptic haunted house horror book, um,
Nice.
which I love so much. It's
And like
so
literally
much
every
fun.
house post-apocalypse is probably haunted.
Well, yes, but I was kind of thinking like because I was watching Haunting of Hill House,
Oh,
and
fucking
I was
love that.
like, I know, I love it so
It's
much. I've
so
watched it through so many
the
times.
follow-up
And Bly Manor,
oh, I'm re rewatching that right now with my kids.
yeah, like both of them, I love tremendously. And but I was just like, we were watching Haunting of Hill House, and I was like, wouldn't it suck if it was like the zombie apocalypse, like it was like the Walking Dead, and you were like, oh, we'll take refuge in this big old house, and it's like Hill House, and like you
That's
go out of the
great.
house and there's zombies, but you stay in the house and it's haunted.
Yeah.
That would kind of
It's just
suck. And then I was like, well,
constant
obviously that's the
tension.
book I'm going to write about post-apocalyptic taking refuge in a haunted house, and like which world is more likely to kill you.
Right.
Um, so but it's fun because everything is dangerous. It's great.
Yeah.
Like my
Yeah.
last couple books have been set very much in like a real world setting, and I was like, we're gonna have some ghosts. It's gonna be great.
Right.
And You Shouldn't Be Here has a haunted house angle, but that one is very different in that I was more playing with like, what if it was a haunted house, but that wasn't like the main conflict? Like it was just a haunted house, but it was just like a piece of the puzzle. And actually the conflict is this other
Right.
thing. And I had someone ask, and they're like, what genre would you say you write? I'm like, I don't know. I just
Right.
take things
That's
I
not my
like, and I'm
job.
like, yeah.
Apparently
So I'm
other
like,
people
what if I
decide that
mash
anyway.
them together? And
Right.
then was like, here, marketing. And yeah, and they were like, is your marketing team just like not like you very much? I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm very annoying to them. But
Well, and you make a good point about writing to deadline because, obviously the author has control with those initial discussions to a certain extent about, okay, how much time are we talking about? But the idea of rushing to write a novel is a little crazy because you can completely have a sub quality novel if you're really staying up till 2 in the morning in the last few weeks to try to get everything done. So but I mean, they don't want you to be missing major deadlines over and over and over and over again, but
mm-hmm.
there needs to be enough time. So I'm a book a year writer. So it takes me about 8 to 10 months to get that first draft done. And I know plenty of people who do it slower, but a lot of people who do it faster. And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I were to do a 3 month novel, it would be terrible. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have fun doing it. And that's part of the thing for me is like, I only write an hour a day. So I look forward to that hour. I'm like, what happens now? And I can take my time with it. And then it just slowly pieces together. And that makes me happy. That makes the job
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. I mean, I will not sugarcoat, like writing You Shouldn't Be Here was kind of miserable. Like I was really excited about the initial concept. I was like, "Ooh, I had an idea and it's great." And then like that's all I had when the book sold on like it was not a robust proposal. It was the world's most lightweight,
It was a paragraph.
threadbare proposal. Almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like less than 5 pages of me being like, "What if this?" And they were like, "Okay, we bought that. Now go." And I was like, "Oh, dang it. I have not even written one word of this book." I have because all that discovery of like finding the character voices and figuring out how they
Right.
no time for any of that. It was just like, all right, write a book, go. And at the time of like, I'm just not feeling inspired today. I'm going to take the day off. And it was like, nope, gotta write a book.
Right.
So
Right.
that book was like squeezed out of me like blood from a rock and not great. And I was convinced it was terrible when I
Right.
turned it in. And I still wound up going. Originally, I was supposed to write it in 4 months, and it took 6. I pushed my deadline. So it was supposed to turn in July. It got turned in September. But, and when I turned it in, I was like, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I didn't even have time to fully like revise it. I finished drafting and I had 1 week to do a very quick read and just like the barest of revisions to fill in
Right.
the parts where I had brackets
Spell
like
check more.
fight here. I'm writing that fight now. But fortunately, when I got it back, my editorial letter, which I was like reading through my fingers because I was like, it's going to be so bad. They're going to be like, this is garbage, throw it out and write it again. But I was very surprised when I got the editorial letter back and they were like, okay, we think this is in pretty good shape. And I was like, what?
Oh.
Are
Did
you
you
kidding
read
me?
it?
And yeah, and I was like, but it's garbage. And like, here are the notes. I was like, that seems wrong. Maybe they read the wrong book. So I'm like looking back through it, and even just like the few weeks, I don't even think I had a month before I got my editorial letter back. Like it was a fast process. But just those like 3 weeks in between gave me enough distance that I read back through. I was like, oh, it doesn't suck. I just felt like it sucked because I didn't have any distance at all from this manuscript. I didn't have any objectivity with it. But fortunately, I guess I have been writing long enough that a lot of the like instincts took over and
Right.
didn't let me write a terrible book, even though it felt terrible.
Right. Well, that's just it, because I mean, as a writer, even if you have all the time in the world, you never feel as good at the end of a book as you do when you first start out, when you're all excited about it.
My favorite part of writing a book is thinking about how great it's going to be. My least favorite part is writing the book.
Right.
Like,
and being like, why can't I make it as great as I had it in my head? But you also just, like, to your point, you lose all perspective. It's not until you start to get professional, either agent or editor feedback, that you have some kind of, but so for me, those weeks when I turn it into my agent, because usually like she's the first person who sees it, who's in the industry. And I have no idea. I'm always scared that she's going to be like, yeah, this needs a lot of work, or this is amazing. Like I never know. So it's always, and then that never changes over time after all these books.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Which is so I'm not like pushing myself with the haunted house book, because I was like, we're going to let this one be fun, because I'm putting in everything I find fun and interesting within like a horror / post-apocalyptic setting. And I was like, the last one was so hard. I would like something that that reminds me that I just really enjoy this.
Right.
And so, and it is like more ambitious than what I've done before, but and I'm also co-writing a book too right now with a friend. So, which is kind of its own thing on its own timetable.
Right.
But yeah, no deadlines right now. That's lovely.
But it is great because sometimes you write your next book based on your experience writing the previous book. So the one that just came out in April was a tough book to write, and a lot of edits, and it was, I had 2 years between books because I had so many edits on this one. And so then I'm like, I am just going to write a straightforward, in your face, unforgiving thriller. And I did that, and it just flowed out of me. It was almost like this anger coming out. And now people are like, I love how angry this book is. And I'm like, yeah, that was because it wasn't intentional. It was my mood.
I had a lot of feelings when I wrote You Shouldn't Be Here, and I put a lot of them in there. And I did have one reviewer who was like, you can feel the feminist rage oozing from the author. And I was like, that on the cover, like, that's a great quote. Because I was like, yeah, I was kind of annoyed about a lot of things. Not about, like, the process was frustrating, but it was also very therapeutic in a lot of ways, because I was working through some stuff.
Right. I mean, it's funny. Yeah.
Sometimes you just need to write angry.
Right. I just got there was just a Goodreads review from my galley, and it said Poe is the name of my character, and she's like 30. And it said, Poe is the epitome of justified female rage. And I'm like, yes, that's what I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah.
That made me so happy to read that.
Yeah. And I was like, and I try not to even, like, I was like, well, my characters aren't, well, one of mine's a teenager and she's mad at everything. But I was like, my main character, like, she's not mad. She's curious. But I'm like, but I was mad at a lot of just like things that I was like, the injustice of the world. And I was like, we're all going to boil it down to this one small town, that they're dealing with the injustice of the world. And you
And
know.
then you give the characters agency to do something, to just go
Hmm.
out there and start taking matters in their own hands.
Yeah,
And it's very cathartic.
it is. It is. I had a like considerable process with a lot of fun moments in there where I was like, I feel really good about that thing I just did. Like that
Awesome.
just felt nice to write. And there were some times where, I go through a revision, I was like, okay, maybe too leaned a little too hard into my own issues here. Maybe we need to pull it
Right.
back and get back in like the book, what the characters would actually be thinking. That was nice therapy, and now we're going to revise it to be a good book.
Right. And
Um,
sometimes you need the editor to tell you that. Sometimes you still don't recognize that. The editor's like, this is sounding like she's, not that your character needs to be likable, but I think you're going to lose readers if you keep going at this level of
yeah, well,
tone.
my notes were more of a like, I don't actually understand why they're doing this here. And I'm like, basically, because I'm like, because that's what I want them to do.
Right. Because
Because
somebody
it
cut
just
me off in traffic
feels,
earlier today.
yeah, because it just feels, and they're like, this doesn't. And I'm like, I'm not a very like actively angry person. So I was kind of living vicarious a little bit. I was
Right.
like,
Me too.
suddenly this very level headed character is going to be a hothead and just like go off. And my editor's like, why? Change personality all of a sudden? I'm like, oh,
It's a fair
that's a
question.
good, because I wanted them to go pick a fight. Like that
Right.
just seemed
Right. Because I
fun.
was pissed off when I was writing this. Uh, well, Lauren, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, you know what's coming next is the storytelling part of the
Yes,
show.
we have to
When,
write absurdist
when
flash fiction.
when we did this last time, I think we used the book Princess Bride.
We did.
I don't remember what the story was, but I'm sure it was great. I'm sure it was. I'm sure people listened to it and then probably wrote fan fiction based on our little story. So now we have.
I mean, I recall we had some very weird world building, mostly because I was just like, what if the door was speaking to me? That's all I remember is that I made the door talk.
Oh yeah, I do
Like
remember
Alice
that.
in
That was weird.
Wonderland.
That was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll try not
I'm
to
up
do
for
that
that.
this time.
You can do whatever you want.
I'll behave.
I've got The Wedding Party by L.R. Jones, another party book, The Last Party by Clare Mackintosh, and the upcoming release Homecoming Queen by Chad Boudreau. So choose one of those.
Let's go with The Last Party because I think it's the most ominous title.
Yeah, and Claire is a phenomenal writer. Even though we're just going to be looking at one sentence, give me a page between 1 and 400.
247.
Okay. So let me quickly scan to find lots of dialogue. All right. I'm just going to read the sentence and you can do whatever the hell you want with it. The character's name is Reese, Rhys, I guess. Reese.
Okay.
Reese looks utterly horrified by the idea.
First, Reese said, counting off reasons on his fingers. I don't even think I own a pair of stilts. And even if I did, I don't think I could walk on them, much less run. You are going to get us killed.
It was exactly the reaction I was expecting from him. Normally, I would be annoyed because I know of many other friends who would love to do exactly what I was proposing. But in this case, his reaction was what I needed. I didn't need him to be successful in what we were about to do. I just needed him to be slower than me.
Some might say that it's callous to throw your cousin to the wolves, as I was about to do. But after what Reese had done to my brother, a small part of me felt a little bit of villainous glee at what he was about to go through.
What I didn't say and what I wanted to tell him was, no, this isn't going to get us killed. This is going to get you killed. But instead, I pivoted because it was essential that he at least get on those stilts. I'll give you $100 to do this.
Reese considered chewing his lower lip. Okay, he finally said, if you can get the stilts, and if I have at least a little bit of time to practice, I might be willing to do this for $200. But I'm going to need you to handle the snake.
This was going better than I expected. Not only did I have the stilts ready for him to practice on, I had real stilts, the ones that he was going to be using, the ones that I had specially made significant changes to that would only be revealed within 30 seconds of him using them. But the snakes, fuck, I hate snakes. we can just call it there. Well, that guy, so you're probably one of the weirder people doing this. You take things to a very strange direction, which is rather intriguing.
I like to I like to play this game often with myself. I was talking about this at my book launch because they asked like how I plot and how I do twists, and I was like, well, the step one is I think like what would be normal. What would a normal person want to do next?
And what would be
and
the
then
exact
I don't
opposite
do
of that?
And then I don't do that.
Exactly.
So it's always like, what did one expect? And so, and then it's like, what is the first weird thing that came into my brain? And so for me, it was stilts and then snakes. I don't know.
Right. There's probably no anthology out there where the theme is snakes and stilts. But
I like to, in my
title.
brain, think that we just wrote something from the point of view of a very dark Indiana Jones.
Right.
Who has to face something, but also is trying to get his cousin killed somehow.
Right.
Like Indiana Jones has been through some stuff.
Well, and as an interesting point, the only way Indiana Jones could have gotten out of that pit of snakes was if he had stilts. He could have gotten right out.
True.
So your subconscious was doing something in there.
Yeah, we never know really what the subconscious is up to. It'll come to me at 3 a.m.
Well, Lauren, it was great to talk to you again, and congratulations on the recent release. And yeah, I guess I will see you at VoucherCon.
Yeah, see you then. Enjoy Nashville. I hope it's not 1 million degrees.
Have a great weekend, Lauren.
You too. All right.
Bye. All right, that's it. That is wrapping up my second conversation with Lauren Thoman. Her recent release, You Shouldn't Be Here, is out now by Thomas & Mercer, and you can find out more about the book and about Lauren at LaurenThomanWrites.com. And while you're online, check me out at carterwilson.com. You can check out my appearances, my books, of course, my newsletter and my blog, and of course, episodes of this show. And if you're interested in my immersive writing and coaching retreats, my one-on-one coaching, or my online classes, check out unboundwriter.com, and you can see all those offerings listed there. That's it for now. More episodes of Making It Up will be out just next week. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're doing that, and always appreciate the support, and take care.